Hi everyone, welcome to today's webinar on designing culverts using RoadEng. Now it's been at least a year and a half, at least in my memory, since we've tackled the topic, and we are really excited today to show you some changes actually to this workflow and to this process. We found a way to simplify it a bit more. And yeah, so let's get into it. Just in terms of a quick introduction, I'm Erin. I'm the Business Development Manager at Softtree, and with me is our resident webinar lead and expert, Matthew Dickey. So in terms of content for today's webinar, we are going to be, pretty much just focusing on demonstrating two methods for the design of culvert. First, we're going to tackle minor culverts, and we're going to be doing this in RoadEng version 9. Minor culverts are done using the Culvert Editor panel in RoadEng's location module. Then we're going to move on to major culverts and fish passage sites. And here we model, culvert excavation and placement in a lot more detail. And we're actually going to be doing this part of the presentation today in RoadEng version 10. Now, version 10 is still in beta testing. It's going to be coming out sometime in early 2022. But it does include some really significant changes that simplify the workflow for major culverts. And of particular note, there's a feature in there called corridor surfaces, and that's going to allow us to, model these major culverts with a lot more ease. So as we get started, just going to tackle a little bit more detail about the differences between these two different methods. So first off, those minor culverts, as I mentioned, they are added to a design using the Culvert Editor panel within RoadEng's location module. Now it includes options for structure type, if it's a box culvert, the type of class, so if it's a natural stream, as well as options for the length, vertical position, skew, gradient. All of that can be configured, and you're able to add these one at a time, or you can add multiple through a sort of an interval approach. Now, this is a much more simplified approach to culverts as compared to major culverts. Now, we would model major culverts one at a time, and they are much more detailed. We model and calculate the volumes for the culvert excavation and placement. We can define our excavation extents for the pipe placement, and they're really much better for considering stream profiles and crossing skew. And as shown here, this is all being done in the location module, so a pretty significant change from the process in version 9, where you are flip-flopping back and forth between location and the terrain module. Now, a note, I think I've got it coming up next here. If you want to get your hands on this new version, it's still in beta, but we've got it available for testing for support subscribers. Yeah, feel free, send us an email, betatest@softtree.com. We can get you hooked up with it today. And major improvements for culverts. The only other piece I did want to have is more of a little announcement. Please do stay tuned. We are going to be putting on a major 3 to 5 part webinar series focusing on considerations for reducing your environmental impact. And as most of us know, culverts are a pretty important part of that. And we will be addressing it in that context with considerations from industry experts in that multi-part webinar series. All the specifics still are in the works. However, stay tuned to those e-blasts, details on those webinars that are going to be in sort of January, February, March of early 2022. And with that, enough of my boring introduction. Let's get into minor culverts. Matt, are you with me?
I am.
Awesome. I'm passing it your way.
Excellent.
And while you get your screen loaded, just a friendly reminder to our audience, you can ask us questions at any time. We're monitoring the question panel, type them in. If you don't hear us answer them right away, hang tight. We do usually get to them by the end of the presentation.
All right, perfect. So as Erin introduced, I'm going to run through 2 different examples, one focusing on minor culverts. We'll tackle that one first, and we'll tackle that in version 9. And then we'll switch over and we'll show some cool version 10 stuff and the new workflow in version 10. So for our minor culverts, I am not going to go through and click in a road alignment and model our tin and all that to start start talking about the culvert panel. So for this, I'm just going to open up a project that's been worked on. So the alignment's largely figured out. We're going to look at how we can use the culvert panel to account for placing our pipes. So we have our design, and of course, most roads are going to have culverts in them. If not stream crossing culverts, at least cross drains. So for this, if I just identified that that's a low point, and we want to add a pipe here, well, we can add it in. So I'm going to click our culvert panel. I'll click add. I can choose whether it's going to be tracked as a natural channel or not. I'll click that, and our pipe is plopped into place. I'm just going to zoom into our 3D view here so we can see what's going on. And I'm going to just configure our settings so I can see the actual culvert showing up in that 3D view. There it is. So we've got a pipe in there, and based off of these default settings that I have set up for it, it's going in there with a skew of 98 degrees. It's going to have a 5% grade attached to it, and the length is automatically being calculated. Now, you don't have to be stuck with however you configure it. Now here, if I want to, for some reason, perch that in my fill, I can come into my vertical position and say, let's make that 1 meter below our center line. And I'll just put it back. I'll hit apply. If I want to change my skew, I can change my skew. So if I want that to be perfectly perpendicular, we can put that in there and it's going to adjust accordingly. And if I want it to be only at a 2% grade, I can just change that tabularly, and voila. And then the auto length. So my length is set to auto. Right now, that's going from my catch point to where it daylights out from either my fill or the existing ground. If I want to tabularly change that, so say I don't want to have people cutting pipes at funny lengths, we'll go 7 and 7, and we'll hit apply. And we've got that in there. Now, if we have any notes that we want to track with this, we can. So let's say example text. I'll hit apply, and nothing happens. Now, the reason nothing happens is just because the settings that I have on here. So as with a lot of other things, we have just different classes and categories of data that's being tracked. So in my labels, in my profile, I have culvert size turned on, so I've got a label for that. But my culvert description label is turned off. I'll just double click that, and we get that example text that's attached to that culvert included at that point. So pretty useful if you need to annotate things like build a sump or whatnot. Now that I mentioned sump, we can also model that. So here, if I hit my properties, I have this overrides turned on. So right now, if I have my fill, if I'm deep enough, so my road height here is, yeah, I guess 3.4 meters. So if I set this ditch depth to be, let's call it 6, and I'm going to want to turn auto on here. But that adds it deepens the ditch at a specific location for the inlet. Now here, that pipe is never going to be able to daylight, so it extends on, and we'd want to fix it. We wouldn't want a big sump in that location because it's not going to work with the geometry of the site. But yeah, it's a useful tool, and you can include it or exclude it. So here, if I don't want any overrides for a sump, I can just turn that off. I'll turn that off. Now, when I added that culvert, I just kept with my default. So in this case, when I've previously had the software open, I've put in a 500 millimeter circular pipe for my cross drain and I hit save. So whenever I go to add another culvert, I'm just going to arbitrarily add these without much consideration for the placement right now. It takes that information on. Now, if I come in here and change this to an 800 mil and change this to a pipe arch, actually, let's go 1.2 and a span of 2. And if I hit save, and if I go over here, that default that I've just set up, it carries over. And here I want that to. So that's kind of some general behavior. And we can, of course, account for other structure types. And we can track our natural channels separate from our cross drains. So I'm just going to nuke those 2 pipe arches that I've added in there. So I'm going to save that as my default for my cross drain, and let's assume I had a creek there. I'm going to call it a natural channel, and this has a different default to it. So previously I'd gone in and told it that my default is going to be a 1500 mil CMP for my streams. And so we can just kind of reduce the clicking when we go through and set things up. And let's add one more pipe out here. Oh. So we've got 3 pipes in our design. I've arbitrarily clicked them in. If I was really focusing on the details of a project, I'd be probably using my 3D view to make sure my skew is appropriate for the lay of the land. But yeah, for this, just want to touch on the general behavior. Now those 3 pipes, if I want to keep track of those, I can take my data table. So I've got a data table here, and that's tracking one type of, well, I guess vertical alignment information. I can add in another data table as well. If I want to have multiple data tables, I can. And I'm going to come in here and I'm going to tell it that I want to generate points at all of my culvert insertion points. I want to populate data, so I want my station, and let's come in here and we want my culvert diameter and culvert length. So if we want to build materials really quickly, we can summarize the culverts we've placed in our project. So that's that. Now, this example that I have here, I probably wouldn't require as many pipes as what I've clicked in, because when I clicked in this alignment, I used another feature in terrain. So I've used our Watersheds feature to choose my alignment, so I can go put my road on the high spots, reduce how much natural flow I divert, and also reduce the number of culverts I need. So when I placed this road originally, I took my tin. So my tin that I'm referencing is in terrain. And I use this tin operations, create watershed features, and I want to go with a grid of 5. So our watershed features tool doesn't use the tin itself. It takes the tin and approximates it with a grid, so more of a raster data type than a tin data type. And we'll set our depression depth as 0.3, just to smooth out any irregularities. So now each one of these polygons represents a different watershed. So I'm going to hit save here. And this is telling me that my file's been updated. Do I want to update it? In my location design. And I can see that, well, I'm crossing a watershed here, so that's probably a reasonable spot to put my pipe. Or actually not really, it's up there. I'd want it in the low point. But as we get further out our alignment here, I'm able to ride the ridges, and the flow is going to be directed in either direction, so I don't have to worry about placing culverts if the water's naturally going away from my road anyway. So I'm a fan of that feature. In version 10, I won't click through it today, but we have added other similar features that I will mention when we get to it. So with that, I'm going to just minimize this, and we are going to start a project from scratch for the major culvert. So for this, I won't show any new features in terrain, but just for the sake of doing it all in version 10. Insert file, I'm going to grab my point data. So LAS files, I'm working with LiDAR in this example. Just so I can work with an image, I'm going to set my projection. So there's our point cloud. We'll click terrain modeling, generate. We'll generate our tin. That's good. And just for a little bit of added context, I'm going to download an image. So there's our project. Our project is we're going to plan to replace the culvert in the existing road here. The channel we're dealing with is agriculture canal or ditch. Assume it's moving a fair bit of water, so we're going to design it as so it's a major culvert. So I'm just going to download this. So there we can see where we're at. And of course, there's our 3D view, so we get a feel for what's going on with our project. Now, just before I jump out and do the rest of our project in location, I won't actually click them. They take a minute to run, and it's of course not fully released yet, so we're still refining things in it, but those extra features that I had mentioned for kind of watershed calculations. In 10, we've added the ability to calculate your drainage area to a point if your tin encompasses the entire drainage area, so it helps for hydrology calculations. And we've got a streams feature tool in there that'll help predict flow paths given a minimum catchment area, and also model ponds where water is expected to stand. So both useful for planning culverts and road locations. Now out of here, and let's jump into location. Just I do see the questions coming in here, and if we've got a lull, I'll answer it while things calculate, but I don't think we'll have much of a lull in this. So we'll get to the questions at the end if I don't answer them as we go. So let's reference that topo file that we've created. And I'm going to add in my image just for the sake of having extra context. And here I'll just take a quick break to explain the direction I'm going and what's different from version 9, because we do have folks that are really familiar with the software in the audience, and we've got folks that it's relatively new to them. So in version 9 and earlier, if we wanted to model our culvert excavation or and kind of stage how you would construction. So first you have to dig out the trench to place your pipe. We'd have to jump back and forth between the terrain modules, and we'd end up merging two different surfaces. The culvert excavation, which would be a graded feature in terrain, and then we'd merge that with our original ground and change that to be our target surface to place our pipe. In version 10, we've taken the having to jump back and forth between terrain out of the equation, at least for a lot of the projects. Yeah, so we're going to merge that excavation into our original ground. Of course, it won't be our original ground once we do that merge, and it's happening automatically. And with that, it's going to reduce our design time. And it's also going to keep things dynamic. So if we chose to trench our pipe location at one spot and then something comes up as the project evolves and we move that, well, we can just move a couple points and we're going to see how that impact affects our geometry and make the adjustments a lot quicker because it's all happening in the same file and things are dynamic. So for this, I am going to the project, it's going to be replace the culvert. There's also going to be a little bit of channel regrading. So I'm going to design my channel regrade and the culvert excavation as one alignment, and then I'm going to do my road as another alignment, and they're going to interact. So for this, I'm going to do my culvert excavation first, and my default template right now is a roadway. Now I've already gone through and I've created a couple different templates. Now these templates are just holders of components. The components came from the library. So for my culvert trench and pipe placement, I've got this culvert template that includes a penstock component. And for the ditch grading, I've just got, it's basically just a roadway component with slopes coming off of it. So to apply that, I'm going to come up to assign by range. And I'm going to just start with my channel template for the entire thing. Well, we're not going to regrade the entire alignment, but we'll just start with a geometry that's reasonable. So we've got that. I'm going to move this over here, and I'm going to go back further than what I would for just the excavation. I want to consider that long profile of the ground that we're working with to make sure the profile of my pipe is designed appropriately. So we've got that. Before I get going too far here, I'm going to just change a couple settings in my 3D view. I'm just making it so I can see that original ground as a surface. And there we are. And I'm going to use that. It makes it easier to line up where I want to put things. And for this, it is a fictional project, but I'm going to assume I'm going to remove that culvert and roadway just because they're stacked right on top of each other, and we could just put that culvert over here and have less flow go through it. I'm going to add a curve here just for the, so let's go there. All right, so that's decent. And for our long profile, I'm just going to go to here. I'll zoom in a bit, make sure that we're pretty good. There's a bit of channel that I want to regrade at the outlet. And then there's a bit on the approach here that's higher than it should. So I'm just going to plan to regrade that. Now, out here where I'm pretty well right on the grade of the existing channel, I don't want to model my earthworks. So let's go from station 70 to 140. We'll have some kind of earthworks going on. So assign by range. And I'm going to use our empty bridge template so I don't have earthworks up until station 70. And then 140 on, same thing. So now I've just got my earthworks going through here. So that's accounting for my channel regrading. And for digging up that existing road and placing a pipe in there, I'm going to use my other template. So I'm going to go from 105 to 120. And there we are. Now with this, where I want to include an embedded pipe, when I built my template, I have it set so my culvert center line is at the center of the pipe. So here I've got an embedment depth of 50% my diameter. You could play with the attachment point to put that however you'd like. But with this, I don't have to put a jog in my profile. It's just offset to be lower than the rest of my profile. So it makes it easier for designing pipes. So that's that. Now we want to see what's going on here. So I'm going to add a corridor surface. And here, let's just look at our subgrade. So there, we've got our subgrade. So total excavation modeled. Now we can also include other surfaces in here. So I want to add in this, but I want to use my final merge surface, and I want that merged into my topo surface. So with that, let's make this bright green. When I design my road over this, if my fill hits my culvert top, it's going to stop and not fill through my culvert. And then my fill is going to go down to the bottom of that merged surface, which in this case includes the leveling course that I have in there. So avoids double counting volumes and accurately accounting for what we have going on. So, and the whole reason this is going to work is because I've got merged into topo surface turned on. Otherwise, it would just stop at my original ground. So that is my pipe alignment. I'm going to jump over to Project Explorer, click New, Horizontal Alignment. And I've got a few things turned on here. Now, just so we can tell the difference, I'm going to just make my topo bold. And I've got point codes turned on here as well. So I've got my subgrade. Let's just make that a different color so we can tell what it is. So as designed right now, my subgrade is right on top of the pipe. We probably want to make a few adjustments here. We want to tie into the existing ground. And we'll add in a curve. So looking good and looking good. That's feathers back into what it should. And let's just go a little further with this so I have more room to place that where I'd like. All right. And here, now this, actually, I'm just gonna, again, gonna add my surface. This time it's not, doesn't matter whether it's merged or not, I'm gonna add it in just for context. Horizontal alignment 2, final merge surface, and let's make it orange. So there we go, and that's going down into our hole. Now, we could rely just on the pipe that we've drawn in the using templates in the other alignment. In this case, I'm not going to do that. And the reason I'm not going to do that, if I want a tabular breakdown of the culverts I've added, being able to track it in the data table is nice. And for that, we'll want to use the Culvert Editor here. We'll click Add. Now, it's set at the inlet here. Now I've got a notch cut in there. So here's a case where I'm going to want to position that by hand, and I'm not going to want to use my auto length. And our skew, we'll want to manually change that. So let's try it at 80. Looks close. And we want to drop that down. So we want it to go Let's try 0.75. So that looks good. And here I don't have, well, let's change our diameter to be the right size. So there, we're looking good. And now that pipe is in there as a facet feature. So pretty slick. Now here I've noticed that I've got my trench is, my grade's higher. I don't have my trench quite far enough. I could jump back in here and let's make that change. I'm not going to focus on actually nailing it here. I'm just going to change the number for the sake of showing how it all works. So there, I've pushed that out further. So we've got our culvert placed. Want that gradient to be set like that. And without getting into the details and kind of messing around with things and doing more of the tabular changes, I'm happy with it. So now to take this and produce a document, we absolutely can do that. We'll jump over to our Multiplot. And now something to note here, the Multiplot is going to only be driven by one alignment at a time. So in this case, I'm going to do my channel realignment as one alignment, and then I'm going to switch workbooks and do my roadway as another. So I've got something set up here, so that whole idea of having workbooks, I've got that. I've got my overview sheet. Now here I don't care about that little bit that's trailing off to show the excess. I could change my scale, or even easier, I can change my pagination settings to just use a single fixed page. And I can position this however I'd like. I've got my plan over profile. So here I've got my zoomed out kind of scale of where things are at, and then zoomed in to show the extents of my project. And I've got my profile showing up here. And it's small, but I can see the grade is 0.3%. And then I've got my cross sections. Now for the cross sections in this one, where I've got my empty template to get my long profile, there's some of those cross sections that I don't care about. So here, it's not until the 4th page where I'm getting useful information showing how we're going to regrade that channel. Now, just for the sake of, so it's from 70 to 140 that we have interesting stuff going on. I'm going to change this range to be 70 to 140. So we don't get a bunch of sections with no earthworks in them. So that would be my channel realignment and culvert excavation component of my design. I would hit File, print to PDF, and then I'd come over here, switch the alignment that I have. I'd grab my workbook with the road portion, and there I've got my plan over profile for my road and cross sections for my road. So pretty slick. There's all sorts of little things that we can add in there to kind of focus on the details. I didn't so much focus on the details with this, but it's certainly a pretty powerful feature. And I've mentioned it, but the whole dynamic aspect of it is really the, well, at its core, it's really beneficial. So here, if I pull this over here and pull this over here, go back to here and recalculate all. We can see that that trench is now over here, and we should probably move our pipe if that's what we're planning on doing. So yeah, pretty slick tool, and I think it'll benefit everyone that wants to design their pipes. And it's certainly useful for other things as well. If you're doing a footing for a wall, or even just staging construction sequence, if you had to put a tote road into the toe of your road to build up in layers, you can account for all those details a lot easier with it. And with that, I think let's switch gears here and tackle, I think there's quite a few questions. We'll start tackling them. Hopefully we'll get through all of them.
Yeah, thank you, Matt, for going through that. There has been an awful lot of questions, and I'm going to do my best to kind of feed them to you. A lot of them, actually, we had responses saying that they've been answered as you went through your presentation. So to those of you sitting here in the webinar still, feel free, open up that, expand your GoToMeeting panel, or sorry, GoToWebinar panel. You can type questions in. They are all anonymous in terms of how we see them. So first things first, basic one, but what is our definition of a minor culvert?
Yeah, so for us, we just produce software. We're not going to dictate what is a major or minor culvert. For us, from a presentation standpoint, it's just going to be driven by how detailed you want to look at it. So for me, if I was building a road and I just wanted to place that like a minor cross drain in my road and not really worry about trenching it for the pipe, just assuming that's going to be taken care of with the the road construction activities, that would be a minor culvert for me. Whereas if it's something detailed and we want to model the excavation to place our pipe, take our long thalls along the length of our stream, which it's likely not perpendicular to our road, then I would consider that a major culvert. But where you apply these two different workflows is entirely up to you and the level of detail that's required for your project.
Awesome. Okay.
Long non-answer.
Yeah, okay. So next question. So we did show, we answered the question that this person asked about a list of culvert quantities in the data table. However, they did want to know if invert levels were possible to add to that as well.
Yeah, so where are we at here? We could do it in the major culvert as well, but this one has more pipes going on and I've already set up a data table. Of course, I've probably got the wrong, there we go. So I've added in my culverts. Now, if I want information, say for staking, in my culverts breakdown here, we can add in our inlet elevation would be our Z. But if you're construction staking with it and you wanted the actual points, we can add those in here as well. We could do the same for the outlet, and you could go and stake what you're working with. So yeah, there we've got a summary, road station, diameter, length. Plop that into your GPS or total station if you're working off of local coordinates and benchmarks, and you could stake the ends of your pipe. The export for that is export to data table, and that would be in ASCII, or you can copy data to clipboard and paste it into something like Excel.
Excellent. The next question, if we deleted a culvert from the design, will the terrain be back to natural? And I believe this was asked in the context of the minor culvert method we first demonstrated.
Yeah, so I'm not 100% sure if I understand the question as much as I should. But for example, if I delete the pipe here, quick delete, it's just going to be removed from the drawing altogether. So it's, yeah, it shouldn't be a matter of any lingering behavior. Hopefully that answers your question. If it doesn't, reach out to us afterwards and we can have a screen share discussion about it.
Or feel free to type a follow-up into the GoToWebinar panel. Next question, and we're getting tight on time here, so maybe we'll tackle, I don't know, 3 or 4 more. Sorry, it's a big list today, Matt. Can you change the material of the pipe?
That's a good question. I don't think so. So yeah, it's not tracked explicitly with the culvert. Easy way to do that would be just to keep track of it in the description. And then you could separate that out if you used common terms for those. So hopefully that's an adequate answer, and it is something that we could consider adding in there easily enough to track as an attribute.
Okay. The next question, on either a minor or major culvert, is there a way to set the elevations that won't match the existing channel? For example, if you take a bridge out and place a box culvert in its place.
Then for that, and I don't have an example for that, but you just want to do the tabular adjustments. So use minimum fill depth or fill depth at center line to adjust your elevation accordingly, adjust your gradient accordingly, and skew accordingly to get that to line up however you'd like. If it was a matter of regrading or bringing in fill for that structure, then I would, so if your bridge had an excavation underneath of it that you wanted to bring up, then I would do that as a major culvert, and I would include the earthworks in the model and place it wherever you'd like or however you'd like. Yeah.
Okay.
Hopefully that answers that.
Excellent. And if we didn't, yeah, please type a follow-up in. We will absolutely address it. The next question, I'm going to say second last question here, just based on time. How is culvert embedment handled?
Yeah, so with the minor culvert, so you're not going to actually take into account the excavation of your material under the pipe, but you could control that by using your minimum fill depth or fill depth at center line to adjust accordingly. Now, for our major, oh, and of course I've gone through and made a mess of things. Let's see if I can get this. Not perfectly lined up, but close. For this, when I set my culvert elevation in this, I first considered 40% diameter, but for that I wasn't going to get the cover I needed, so I just dropped it down a bit. Now, if I want to move where that pipe is positioned, it'll depend on the template you're using or template components that you're using, but here in the connection, we can shift this down. So if I want to go down 0.2, I've shifted that down. Or did I shift that up? Oh, yeah, it's negative, so I shifted it up. So that's down, and we can shift this again. Connection point there, or just connection point here, doesn't matter. 0.2, and away we go. So now I'm shifted down even more, so I'd be at like 0.6 of my diameter. So that's how I did it. And yeah, I'm sure there's other ways, but yeah, it'll just depend on your project, which way is best for you and which components you use in your template.
Excellent. Okay, last one, and then those extra questions that are up in the panel, I'm so sorry we're not going to get to them today, but we will reply to you by email. Last question. So in this presentation, we've only talked about circular pipe shapes. Can we design a square culvert?
Yeah. Now, we'd have to use a template with a square culvert in there if we did it as a major, but assuming still you wanted to account for it with the culvert panel. So in properties here, we've got a rectangular box culvert. So let's say that that has a height of 2.4 and a width of 3, so rectangular. And now I've got a box culvert placed in there instead of a circular pipe or pipe arch, or what else do we have? Open bottom arch. So yeah, all sorts of flexibility.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for attending today. Obviously, thank you, Matt. I hope you all found the presentation really useful. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.